Voters want fighters. That's what they're telling Democrats. And they think their current crop of members in their 70s and 80s even just are not up to the task.
Good morning. I'm Anna Palmer.
And I'm Max Cohen.
And welcome to the Daily Punch, brought to you by Punchable News. It's Thursday, August 7th, 2025. Let's get into the mix. Here are your Washington headlines of the day. Number one, we've got Democrats facing a generational divide. Number two, Senator Tom Cotton is pushing the Defense Department on foreigners' ability to access computer systems. And number three, some news here. The GAO is offering hundreds of employees buyouts. All right, Max, I was thinking about this actually this week. We didn't really do a big introduction to you. I know a lot of our audience knows you from the read back and hosting that, but maybe tell us a little bit about, we've got Jake and his fish and Yukon and all kinds of things. What's one or two things that our listeners should know about you, in addition to the fact that you cover the Senate expertly and a lot of campaign news for us?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I've been at Punchable News almost from the very beginning. Joined in June 2021. It feels like a very long time ago. Definitely my passions include all things sports, whether that's English soccer. I'm a big fan of Fulham Football Club. I used to live in London. And I still love playing soccer in DC today. So I'm saying I'm your guy. Anything sports, feel free to give me a ping. And I know Jake has his music, as you mentioned. My thing is all things the sporting world.
All right. And maybe if Max really likes you, he'll bring out his British accent, which is actually pretty incredible. All right, let's get to the story of the morning. We are leading Punchable News AM with a great top, looking at Democrats and how voters that are Democrat are really pushing for wanting the next generation to come along. And the fact that you've got quite a few members themselves facing primaries as that kind of tension builds within the party.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting story to start the day, because we've covered a lot of that generational change in the Capitol. We even covered Brian Schatz's bid for Senate whip, right? And now we're going to talk about the House. Voters want fighters. That's what they're telling Democrats. And they think their current crop of members in their 70s and 80s even just are not up to the task. And there's this fascinating rise of younger Democratic challengers who are saying this cycle, now that Trump's in his second term, we're no longer going to, quote, wait our turn. We're going to start challenging these members. And it really is more pronounced, in my opinion, on the Democratic side, because as we note in the story, there are no term limits for House Democrats on how long you can be a chairman. And there are for Republicans. And that incentivizes these Democrats to stay in office well into their 80s, as we cover. Whereas for Republicans, if you can't be your prize committee chair, it might be better just to head home if you're 75, 80. Democrats, they want to stick around.
Yeah, this has been something for the past 20 years I've been in Washington, where you've had this tension points, right? Where Democrats, because for so long they were really built, their committee structure and leadership structure was built on the seniority system. It was a wait your turn system, right? And we talked a lot on this podcast about how that tension and change has been coming for quite a while, right? And we saw this certainly at the committee level, and we've seen it as there's been challenges when we get into this in the item when it comes to the Agriculture Committee, when it comes to judicial, a few committees on the Democratic side, where all of a sudden you have the younger Democrat winning, or sometimes, members stepping aside because they know that they aren't going to be able to just rely solely on seniority anymore. But also, interestingly enough, this isn't just a kind of in Washington story. This is really a story across the country. We title it a primary minefield. Among those targeted, they include Nancy Pelosi, former longtime leader of the House, Steny Hoyer, Nadler, Brad Sherman, Emmanuel Cleaver, John Larson, Stephen Lynch. The list goes on, where this isn't just, happening for one or two members, but you see a lot of these veteran members facing challenges within their own party.
Yeah, I think primary minefield is the best way to put it. You could also say it's an explosion of younger Democrats just furious at what they see as an old party leadership, which is not up to the task of fighting Trump. I also might note this is all after what we saw with former President Joe Biden. And that
Hmm.
infuriated Democrats and Republicans and independents for what they perceived as a president who was hiding from the public that maybe he was not up to the task. And he didn't want anyone voters to know that. He wanted to run for re-election. I think that brought anger at someone who was going to be well into his 80s, into a second term, running and brushing away calls for him to step aside. That's filtered down to the grassroots, and more younger people are running to unseat those older House members you just mentioned.
All right, Max, let's move on to the number two story of the morning. We've got some news. Senate Intel Committee Chair Tom Cotton is pressing Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to immediately change Pentagon policies that allow non-U.S. citizens to access the department's computer systems. In a letter to Hegseth, Cotton demanded that foreigners be immediately barred from accessing DoD systems. This comes after some stunning reporting from ProPublica in July about Microsoft's use of Chinese-based engineers to maintain those systems. You don't often see Republicans going after the Trump administration right now, but this is one of those instances where you have not only Senator Cotton, but you have Jeanne Shaheen and others raising alarms here.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it just shows that one of the few remaining bipartisan consensus areas in Washington are those who are China hawks. And there is tremendous concern among the national security community on the Hill that some of the sensitive Pentagon data could be falling into the hands or being controlled by those in the Chinese Communist Party. And we've seen throughout the past couple of years that Democrats and Republicans are willing to say, let's stand up to the CCP, let's secure our data, secure our future in this sense, whether that's, American farmland or in this instance, Pentagon data.
Yeah, we have the backstory on Cotton pushing Hegseth, but also, interestingly enough, Cotton, who is the number 3 Senate Republican leader, sent a separate letter Wednesday to the Intel Corporation over alleged ownership stakes in Chinese semiconductor and advanced manufacturing firms. So this is, just to the story is really focused on Cotton going after the Defense Department, but this is a broader issue for Cotton, right? And the idea that you kind of brought up, which I think is a smart, take here, is the idea that actually this is just one of those issues where you have members of Congress being very opposed to China and Chinese interference or potentially ownership stakes in companies that deal with national security.
Yeah, and two quick things on that note. The first I'd say is that Tom Cotton is really making a name for himself as a foreign policy hawk, as a foreign policy leader. He's always considered, whenever there's an opening, could he be SecDef? Could he be CIA director? Could he be Secretary of State, right? Cotton's name is always floated for future Republican administrations. And this is just another sign of him leading on that. The second note is, I think one of the undercovered stories of Washington working recently has been the House Select Committee to counter the Chinese Communist Party, which doesn't always get headlines, but there's tremendous bipartisan work done in that committee, working together, Raja Krishnamurthy and now John Mulinar, to get legislation passed that both parties really agree on to counter China.
All right, let's run to the number 3 story of the morning. Some news. The GAO is offering hundreds of employees voluntary buyouts ahead of the uncertainty over how much funding the agency will receive from Congress. Of course, this is the watchdog that has been under fire from the Trump administration and House Republicans. And now they are proposing to halve the agency's budget. This would be a big deal. Certainly reporters, independent groups rely on the GAO in terms of their numbers, in terms of how they calculate different things, but facing pressure here in Trump's Republican Washington.
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly in that intro with the uncertainty is what is just really hurting these agencies, organizations, because they just don't know what the funding levels will look like, because the Senate is marking up and passing appropriations bills at a much higher funding level than the House, right? And that's kind of been the story of the past couple months, with House Republicans saying, cut, cut, cut. Senate Republicans working with Democrats, because of course you need 60 votes, and having much more bipartisan and much more robust funding levels. But this is real life here. And even though the Senate is trying to fund some of these organizations like the GAO at a higher level, the organization leadership is saying, we just don't know. And with the House numbers, they're going to have to offer these buyouts and plan to downsize.
Yeah, it's interesting point, the kind of the difference between the House versus the Senate. We write the agency previously warned that it could lose more than 2,200 of its roughly 3,500 employees under the House GOP spending proposal. Senate Republicans, as you note, have not called for such cuts. So we'll have to see where this all shakes out. But certainly there's a lot of, people who are working there wondering, do they have a future in government service or not? And, I think also, what does that mean for what is GAO able to do with, if there is cuts with less people, what does that mean in terms of actually putting out reports and things like that? That is something that we will be watching very closely in the days and weeks to come. All right, we're going to leave it there. Thanks so much for listening this morning. We appreciate it. If you like the Daily Punch, share it on social media, tell your friends, and of course, subscribe on YouTube. You can find us at Punchbowl News there. We appreciate it. And if you want to go deeper on all these issues and more, sign up for our free morning newsletter at punchbowl.news. Have a good day. Stay safe, everybody.